Name's Joe. For over 20 years, I've dug through archives, police reports, and newspaper files most people forgot or wanted forgotten. Some stories ruin careers. Some make people disappear. I've had doors slammed in my face, phones tapped, and a few times, shadows following me home. That's why I wear the mask. Not for show, for survival. You might think I'm just telling you stories. I'm not. These are real. Every file I open comes with a price. And tonight, the file on my desk belongs to a man they called America's first serial killer. His name was H. Holmes, and his building was designed to kill. Herman Webster Mudgett, known later as H. Holmes, was born on May 16, 1861, in the quiet town of Gilmanton, New Hampshire. His parents, Levi Horton Mudgett and Theodate Page Price, were strict Methodists. Holmes would later hint that his childhood was cold and unforgiving, though whether this was truth or calculated myth remains uncertain. What is certain is that from an early age, Herman was fascinated by anatomy and the human body. Local tales claim that as a boy, he was once forced by bullies to confront a human skeleton in a doctor's office as a prank. Instead of fear, he felt curiosity. He excelled in school, and by 1882 he had enrolled at the University of Michigan's medical school. It was there he learned anatomy, dissection, and perhaps more importantly for his future crimes, how to manipulate records and exploit loopholes. Stories circulated that Holmes stole cadavers from the lab, altered their appearance to look like accident victims, and then collected on fraudulent life insurance policies. After graduating in 1884, Holmes drifted from job to job until he arrived in Chicago in 1886. There, he adopted a new name, Dr. Henry Howard Holmes. He charmed his way into a job at a drugstore on the corner of South Wallace Avenue and 63rd Street. When the elderly owner died, Holmes convinced the widow to sell him the business. Soon after, she vanished without a trace. Across the street from that pharmacy was an empty lot. Holmes purchased it, and in 1887 began construction on what neighbors believed would be a mixed-use building, shops on the first floor, offices and apartments above. But Holmes's design was unlike anything the city had seen. He hired and fired multiple construction crews, ensuring no single team knew the entire layout. Staircases led to brick walls, doors opened into empty shafts, secret passages wound between rooms. The third floor held strange, windowless chambers. Some were lined with asbestos, others were airtight. A few contained chutes that dropped straight to the basement. And the basement, that was Holmes's workshop. Furnaces, acid vats, and dissection tables filled the space. In time, newspapers would call it the Murder Castle. By 1893, the World's Columbian Exposition brought millions of visitors to Chicago. Holmes advertised his building as a hotel, offering young women work and accommodation. Many checked in. Some were never seen again. Witnesses would later recall women entering rooms from which no sound emerged, and never exiting. Theories abound about how Holmes killed them. Some say he gassed his victims in airtight rooms. Others believe he used hidden peepholes and passageways to stalk them before striking. However he did it, the end was often the same. Bodies disposed of in acid, burned in the furnace, or sold as skeletons to medical schools. Holmes was more than a killer. He was a con man. He ran multiple scams at once, using charm and deceit to swindle suppliers, investors, and lovers alike. Marriage proposals, fake businesses, real estate fraud. All were tools in his arsenal. And while Chicago bustled with fairgoers, his hotel thrived as a trap for the curious, the trusting, and the unlucky. Holmes' Hotel thrived during the summer of 1893. The World's Columbian Exposition drew an endless stream of visitors, many of them young women traveling alone in search of work, adventure, or independence. To Holmes, they were perfect prey. He was handsome, articulate, and presented himself as a successful businessman. He could make people feel safe while guiding them straight into danger. One of his known victims was Julius Smythe, the wife of a man who worked for Holmes in the drugstore. Julia began an affair with Holmes after her marriage fell apart, and she moved into the building with her young daughter, Pearl. For a time, Holmes seemed almost devoted to them, but when Julia became pregnant and demanded marriage, she and Pearl disappeared. Holmes later claimed Julia died during an abortion he performed, though her body was never found. Another was Emmeline Segrand, a stenographer who accepted Holmes's offer to work for him. Colleagues last saw her entering Holmes's office in December 1892. She never left. A witness later reported seeing Holmes carrying a large trunk out of the office, struggling under its weight. Then came the World's Fair, and with it, an unprecedented flood of potential victims. Holmes used classified ads to lure young women to Chicago with promises of jobs, housing, or romance. Some stayed in his hotel, others he met elsewhere, but the pattern was often the same. After meeting Holmes, they vanished. No police investigation linked the disappearances at the time. Chicago was too crowded, the transient population too large, and Holmes too clever. His building was a maze designed for control. Rooms had doors that locked only from the outside. Some were completely soundproof. One, known later as the airtight vault, had no windows or ventilation. Theories suggest Holmes may have pumped gas into these rooms, rendering victims unconscious or killing them outright. Once dead, the bodies could be dropped down greased chutes into the basement. There, Holmes had options: quick disposal in the furnace, dissection for the sale of skeletons to medical schools, or dissolution in acid vats. Despite the danger, Holmes maintained a constant stream of romantic entanglements. He was often engaged or married to more than one woman at a time, each unaware of the others. He wove a web of lies with ease, even convincing some women to sign over property or life insurance policies to him. But even a man as cunning as Holmes couldn't avoid risk forever. His downfall began with a business partner named Benjamin Pitezel. The two met in 1890, and Holmes quickly realized Pitezel was both gullible and willing to bend the law. They engaged in various scams, but their partnership would eventually lead police straight to Holmes. After the affair ended, Holmes's debts began to mount. He abandoned the murder castle and traveled across the country, committing fraud wherever he went. He was wanted in several states, but he had always been slippery, moving before warrants caught up to him. In 1894, Holmes and Pitezel concocted an insurance scam. The plan was to fake Pitezel's death and collect on a $10,000 life insurance policy, splitting the payout between Holmes, Pitezel, and Pitezel's wife, Carrie. Holmes, however, had no intention of sharing the money or letting Pitezel live. What happened next was both shocking and cunning. In Philadelphia, Holmes killed Pitezel for real, using chloroform and setting up the body to look like an accidental explosion victim. He collected the insurance money but didn't stop there. He convinced Carrie Pitezel that her husband was still alive and in hiding, persuading her to let him take 3 of her children under the guise of reuniting them with their father. Instead, Holmes began moving the children from city to city, all while keeping their mother in the dark. It was a deadly game of manipulation, and it would soon unravel his entire empire. Holmes traveled with the 3 Pitezel children, Alice, Nellie, and Howard, moving them through a series of cities in late 1894. He told their mother, Carrie, elaborate lies about where her husband was and why the children had to be kept apart from her for the time being. Sometimes he claimed Benjamin was hiding in London. Other times he said it was too dangerous for the family to be reunited just yet. In truth, Holmes was carefully orchestrating a plan to eliminate the children. In Indianapolis, he lodged young Howard separately from his sisters. Shortly after, Howard vanished. Later investigations suggested Holmes killed him, burned his remains in the stove, and disposed of the ashes in a vacant house's chimney. Alice and Nellie, unaware of their brother's fate, continued to travel with Holmes. He brought them to Toronto, where he rented a house under a false name. On October 25, 1894, he locked the sisters in a large trunk, drilled a small hole into the side, and inserted a hose connected to gas. Both girls suffocated. Their bodies were buried in the cellar of the Toronto house. Holmes believed he was still in control, but Pinkerton detectives had begun tracking him across the country. The Pinkertons were relentless, trained to follow faint trails of aliases, receipts, and false identities. In Boston, they finally caught up to him on November 17, 1894. Officially, the arrest was for horse theft in Texas, but investigators quickly realized they had someone far more dangerous in custody. Under pressure, police began unraveling Holmes's scams, disappearances, and possible murders. The trail led back to the murder castle in Chicago. When authorities searched the building, they were confronted with a nightmare: soundproof rooms with strange restraints, trapdoors leading to hidden spaces, a greased chute to the basement, and in that basement, a furnace large enough to cremate bodies, vats filled with acid, and surgical tables. Journalists swarmed the story, painting Holmes as the monster of 63rd Street. The press labeled him America's first serial killer, though the exact number of his victims remains unknown. Some estimates suggested he killed 9. Others claimed it was over 200. In truth, only a handful of murders could be proven, but the public didn't care. The image of the charming doctor with a house built for death was too powerful to ignore. Holmes's trial in Philadelphia in 1895 focused on the murder of Benjamin Pitezel. His defense was no match for the evidence, and the jury took little time to find him guilty. While awaiting execution, Holmes wrote a lengthy confession. In it, he admitted to killing 27 people, though some of those victims were later found alive, suggesting Holmes was as much a liar in death as in life. On May 7, 1896, at Moyamensing Prison in Philadelphia, H. Holmes was hanged. Witnesses reported that it took over 15 minutes for him to die, his neck failing to snap instantly. Even in death, he seemed to resist giving anyone the satisfaction of seeing him suffer quickly. After his execution, rumors swirled. Some claimed Holmes had bribed the prison to fake his death, and that another man was buried in his place. Others said the murder castle was haunted, its halls echoing with the cries of the dead. In 1895, before his execution, the building had been gutted by fire under suspicious circumstances, erasing many of the physical clues to its true horrors. Holmes's name became legend, part fact, part fiction. Over the decades, books, documentaries, and films have tried to piece together the truth. But like many killers, Holmes understood something important. Sometimes the mystery is more powerful than the reality. And that's the story of the man who built a house not to live in, but to kill in. If you want to hear more from the files I've kept hidden, subscribe now and tell me in the comments, do you think we've heard the whole truth about Holmes? Or is there still more buried beneath the floorboards? Because next time, we're leaving Chicago behind and opening a file on a man the papers once called the Devil in the North. His crimes didn't just take lives, they vanished entire towns.